Silver Surfer's portrayal was one of the best things about the 2000s Fantastic Four movies, but did you know that we almost got to see that version of the character get his own spin-off movie? This is only one example of many different attempts at creating a live-action adaptation of the Surfer over the years. Like, for example, could you imagine Quentin Tarantino directing a superhero movie? It's hard to think that a director with such a unique personal style would consider directing a type of movie that usually have to fit a certain mold and tend to have a lot of studio involvement during the creative process. However, if you know a bit about Tarantino, then you'd know that he's mentioned many times in the past how he grew up reading comic books, so he genuinely loves the medium. After finding huge success with his big directorial debut, Reservoir Dogs, Tarantino actually considered adapting 2 comic books for his next film, titles that he was personally fond of, and these were Luke Cage, Hero for Hire, and The Silver Surfer. And I know, it might seem a little hard to envision a sci-fi superhero movie directed by Tarantino, but he's never hidden the fact that he's a big comic book fan. During Reservoir Dogs, we can actually see a Silver Surfer poster hanging on a wall in Mr. Orange's apartment, a small detail that I really appreciate, and it wouldn't be the last time that Tarantino made a Silver Surfer reference. Around 1994, while the movie Crimson Tide was being developed, the producers brought in Quentin Tarantino to do some additional writing for the script's dialogue scenes, and even though his contributions went uncredited, it's known that he was responsible for including some pop culture references into the film. This is why in the middle of the movie, there's a scene where a couple of Marines get into a fight while everybody's eating, and when Denzel Washington's character breaks up the fight and asks what was the problem, one of the officers responded that they got into an argument about which Silver Surfer artist was better, Mobius or Jack Kirby.
Everybody that reads comic books knows that Kirby's Silver Surfer is the only true Silver Surfer. Now, am I right or wrong?
You're right, sir.
All right, get out of here.
Yes, sir.
I just love that this movie has such a random, obscure reference like this, and they mention not only Jack Kirby, but also reference Mobius and Silver Surfer Parable. Tarantino has said in the past that his love for the Silver Surfer stems from having seen the 1982 remake of Breathless, starring Richard Gere and Valerie Kaprisky, in which the movie's protagonist is constantly seen reading Silver Surfer comics throughout the story.
If leave you must, then let us depart together.
Say no more. It cannot be. It can never be. Where soars the Silver Surfer, there must he soar alone.
Tarantino's dream of directing a Luke Cage movie ultimately never moved forward, and so he later approached Constantine Film to propose the idea of making a Silver Surfer adaptation, given that at the time they had the movie rights for the Fantastic Four and all the related characters, such as the Silver Surfer. Tarantino reportedly gave the studio executives an extensive script that was close to 500 pages, which is a lot considering most scripts tend to be around 90 to 120 pages. Unfortunately, even though Tarantino was very passionate about the character, Constantine Film decided to pass on this idea, believing that adapting the Surfer during that time would have been far too expensive considering the huge amounts of special effects they would have had to use. Constantine Film ended up working with Roger Corman in 1994 to produce a low-budget adaptation of the Fantastic Four, a movie that was never released theatrically in the US despite it being fully finished. Interestingly enough, this wasn't the first time that a Hollywood studio attempted to adapt the Silver Surfer, and although we've recently seen the character adapted for a second time in live action, sorta, it was a very long process for Marvel to finally be able to adapt the Surfer for a feature film. In the book Marvel Comics: The Untold Story written by Sean Howe, it mentioned that Hollywood film producer Lee Kramer bought the Silver Surfer's movie rights during the 70s, given that he had always been a big fan of the character, and he soon began working on a possible live-action film adaptation. As we all know, traditionally, the Fantastic Four are heavily involved in Silver Surfer's origin story, since his debut comic had him appearing on Earth to lead the arrival of Galactus, with the FF having to stop them, and the Surfer later being inspired by them and Alicia Masters as well, recognizing humanity's value, something that finally convinced them to turn on Galactus. For this potential Surfer movie, they would have had to change this, since at that time the Fantastic Four's movie rights belonged to other producers, meaning that Lee Kramer couldn't use them, and his movie would have to rework the character's backstory. To deal with this situation, Kramer decided to hire the original creators, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby themselves, attempts to write a new origin story for the Surfer that would be completely unrelated to the Fantastic Four. This led to Lee and Kirby working on what is often considered to be one of, if not the very first official graphic novel that Marvel ever published, that being 1978's Silver Surfer: The Ultimate Cosmic Experience. It's a story that also had Norrin Radd being transformed into the Herald of Galactus like in traditional Marvel lore, but once they arrived on Earth, the Surfer became inspired and touched by humanity's qualities all on his own, without the intervention of the FF or Alicia Masters. After having a huge battle, they would separate, and Galactus would later create a new female herald named Ardina to seduce the Surfer and convince him to return to being a herald, with it being ultimately revealed that Ardina was in reality a clone of Norrin Radd's dead former lover, Shala Bal. This graphic novel was meant to be used as a basis for the live-action Surfer movie, and Lee Kramer was envisioning it as a possible space rock opera, inspired by how 2001: A Space Odyssey advanced its plot forward by using classical music, but he wanted to give it a modern rock soundtrack, and hired Paul McCartney to work on the film's score. He was also considering Olivia Newton-John for the role of Ardina, and had offered the role of the Silver Surfer to bodybuilder Frank Zane, with his likeness actually being used for the only piece of concept art that we have available for this project, where we can see Zane as the Surfer wandering through space, staring at his own reflection on his board. The film remained stuck in development hell for years until it was finally cancelled due to lack of funding and financial backing, and the 1978 Silver Surfer comic ended up being the last time that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby ever collaborated. Many years passed without any new attempt at adapting the Silver Surfer for a live-action film, mainly because visual effects hadn't advanced to the point where the character could be properly adapted, and the budget would have had to be insanely high for it to work. It wasn't until 1989 that Marvel was approached by Eric Fleming and Robert Letterman, two students from the USC School of Cinematic Arts, who asked Marvel permission to use the Silver Surfer for a student film that they planned on doing, since they were huge fans of the character's comics and also believed that they had found a way to render the Surfer in CGI. And they completed the short film in 1991 and premiered it in 1993 during a USC film festival. The short began with a group of scientists picking up the Silver Surfer's radio signals as he approached Earth's orbit, with him landing in Los Angeles, and immediately helps out a small kid that's being bullied. The effects they used to achieve the Surfer's look was really advanced for the time. It's an amazing use of early CG animation being able to fully render a human skeleton and figure, something that was really more complicated to achieve back then. The positive reception of the student film made movie studios interested once more in making a Silver Surfer adaptation, especially now that it was actually feasible from a visual effects standpoint. This is around the time that Quentin Tarantino approached Constantine Film to pitch them his vision for a Surfer movie, and even though they passed on his proposal, there were many other attempts at developing an adaptation. One of the earliest scripts for a potential Silver Surfer movie has actually leaked online through the years, and it's fully available to read. It was written by screenwriter John Turman, and the movie's plot would have revolved around a high-ranking city officer named Ray Ramsey, who was created for this story, and Alicia Masters from the comics as protagonists. As Silver Surfer arrives on Earth, he soon finds himself fighting against the US military, with him later taking refuge in Alicia Masters' apartment as he's being chased by the army. The Surfer would eventually be captured by the military in order to conduct experiments on him, as Ray and Alicia try to investigate what is this mysterious Galactus that he had warned them about. Inevitably, the Surfer would finally escape from the military and learns to understand and appreciate humanity as he continues to observe us and sees the best in us through living examples like Alicia, with our heroes later confronting Galactus once he finally tries to consume Earth. What's funny is that the thing that eventually stops Galactus is music. They play some show tunes during the third act that actually captivates Galactus and makes him stop, with the Surfer later explaining that he had never heard music on any other planet throughout the universe. It's something unique to Earth that he couldn't understand, and he didn't want to destroy something that he doesn't understand. So even though the 80s space rock opera never happened, it's interesting that the script also included an important musical component to it. The script does a good job at slowly building up the Silver Surfer's arrival on Earth in the first half of the story, although it does meander a bit on the second half as they prepare for the oncoming threat of Galactus. The Surfer himself is treated like a Christ-like figure, a celestial savior that empathizes with humanity and recognizes our value as a species. They even show him doing miracles like healing Alicia Masters with a mere touch, or even reviving a couple of thugs that the Surfer had previously killed during the first act. Even more examples happen later in the story, such as during a scene where the Surfer disguises himself in a clothing store and pays the clerk by turning an ashtray into solid gold. He then explores the city, eats a hamburger at a diner, and pays the waitress by turning her pencil into a diamond. As the Surfer continues to explore the city, he eventually finds himself in a poor low-income area and witnesses a drug deal get interrupted by a drive-by shooting that doesn't hurt any of the targeted gang members, but a kid does get shot by a stray bullet and dies. And as his mother is holding the deceased body of her son, the Surfer places his hand on the child's wound and instantly heals him, bringing him back to life. When the resuscitated child asks his mother what just happened, she just says, "A miracle." And there's even more religious connotations, like when a scientist describes Galactus as a godlike figure, a near-omnipotent being that's completely apathetic to the countless lives he erases, treating him more like a natural disaster just like the comics tend to do. And they actually described him as a huge humanoid purple figure just like in the comics. You know, instead of a cloud. There's also a few details that connected this unmade movie with a larger Marvel universe. In the first act, they would have shown a kid reading a Fantastic Four comic book, and then later describes a bust of Ben Grimm among the sculptures in Alicia Masters' apartment. During the third act, it also mentions that the army used a mesh net made of adamantium to contain the Silver Surfer's board. I personally did enjoy this unmade script, and wouldn't have mind seeing the movie actually get made. It's not a perfect story, with it being a bit meandering as it switches from following the Silver Surfer to following Ray Ramsey and Alicia Masters, who were basically the real protagonists of the story. The movie's main villain was a generic army major that wasn't all that engaging, to be honest, and it didn't explore the Surfer's backstory as Norrin Radd at all, only briefly mentioning Zen Law, so the Surfer ends up feeling a bit shallow and underdeveloped as a result. Still though, this is a well-written script that, with a couple of changes, could have served for a pretty good movie, but it's only one of many perspectives on how a film about the Silver Surfer should play out. 20th Century Fox eventually bought from Marvel the movie rights of the X-Men and Fantastic Four, alongside their related characters, and they continued developing the potential Silver Surfer movie, having other writers continuing to work from John Turman's ideas, writers such as Richard Jeffries, John M. Bergman, Mike Finch, and later on in the year 2000, Fox brought in Andrew Kevin Walker, the writer of movies like Seven and The Killer, to make further revisions to the screenplay. His version of the movie would have opened with Galactus arriving on Zen Law, about to consume the planet, as Norrin Radd is chosen to approach his mothership out in space. It's there that Norrin Radd offers him his servitude as his herald, exploring the universe on his behalf in order to find planets for him to consume, and in return Zen Law would be spared. Galactus agrees, endowing Norrin Radd with his overwhelming cosmic power, manifesting a powerful board so that he could travel the cosmos as the Silver Surfer. The script then jumps 1 million years into the future, as we see an immensely depressed Silver Surfer that's already consumed by the grief of being responsible for the deaths of countless living beings, whose planets were scouted by him and marked for Galactus to consume. It's in this state that we find the Surfer, as he had just discovered Earth, but this is planet Earth in the year 200,000 BC, and as the Surfer observed this vast beautiful planet filled with prehistoric life forms, he decides that he can no longer do Galactus' bidding, and tries to end his life by plunging himself into the core of a huge mountain, something that didn't kill him, but it did cause him to lay dormant on Earth for thousands of years, until he later wakes up during modern times, as Galactus finally located him and is now fast approaching Earth to devour it. When the Surfer wakes up, he begins to learn our language and as much knowledge he can about our planet and the entire history of human civilization, with him later storming into a General Assembly of the United Nations to try to warn the world's leaders about the upcoming destruction that approaches Earth. Of course, he's seen as a lunatic and attacked by security, but as he leaves, he flies away with a woman who acts as executive liaison for the UN. Her name's Helen Hudson, and the reason why the Surfer became so infatuated with her is because she looks identical to her deceased wife, Shala Bal. Galactus also has a new herald, a powerful being called a powerful robotic knight who can fly and shoots cosmic blasts from its helmet's visor. He arrives on Earth before Galactus to hunt down Silver Surfer and later kidnaps Helen Hudson to lure him. While the script has genuinely interesting concepts and good ideas for specific scenes, it also kinda has an unfocused narrative, since the movie not only would have focused on the Surfer's arrival, the military hunting him down, and Galactus attacking Earth with his new herald, it also would have included a subplot with Mephisto trying to capture the Silver Surfer's soul, something that was incorporated into the story in a pretty clunky and unnatural way, since Mephisto just randomly pops up throughout different scenes and always feels out of place, with the script feeling like it loses focus every time he appears. The script's dialogue also feels kind of obvious, with the characters often exclaiming exactly how they feel out loud, especially the Surfer who just talks a lot, something that did happen a lot in his classic Lee and Kirby comic run. The dialogue in those comics was admittedly very verbose, but this script often ended up having the characters saying really obvious things. There's even multiple times where people are just talking to themselves while they're completely alone. It feels kinda cheesy, honestly, and while Andrew Kevin Walker is a good writer, this script just wasn't, in my opinion. Of course, as we all know though, the Surfer did eventually get adapted into a live-action movie in 2007 during Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer, a movie that might not be perfect, but it was still genuinely good. And the best part of the movie was the Surfer himself, who was animated in a really great way for its time, working off of a motion capture performance by Doug Jones, and the character himself being voiced by Lawrence Fishburne.
Okay. You win.
Silver Surfer was just awesome in this movie, so much so that Fox even planned on having this version of the Surfer spin off into his own solo film, hiring legendary comic book writer J. Michael Straczynski to write a screenplay for this potential spin-off. Doug Jones was asked about this during an interview with comicbook.com, saying that when he originally signed with Fox to do Rise of the Silver Surfer, he signed a 3-picture deal, and he always believed one of those movies was going to be the Surfer spin-off. However, none of this ended up happening, and he never got to read J. Michael Straczynski's script. Straczynski made further statements in an interview with MovieWeb, saying that he began writing the screenplay right around the time the Fantastic Four sequel was about to release in theaters, with the intention being that the spin-off would pick up with the Surfer immediately after the last moment of Rise, with the Surfer dealing with the consequences of betraying Galactus. The Surfer would travel back to his home planet, Sen-La, since the reason that it wasn't destroyed all those thousands of years ago was because Norrin Radd made a deal with Galactus. But now that the deal is broken, the Surfer needs to get back to his home planet before Galactus consumes it. While he said that the script is pretty good and would have liked to see it get adapted, it seems like Fox was disappointed by the underwhelming reception and box office performance of Rise of the Silver Surfer, so in the end they scrapped their plans to continue that film series. Here's the thing though, Naked, Fox eventually ended up rebooting the Fantastic Four in 2015, for a more grounded, darker story heavily based on the ultimate iteration from the comics, a movie that's just... Fox was actually trying to make their own little Marvel shared universe with the characters they still had the rights to. They even considered having the X-Men and Fantastic Four crossover later on, and were considering many different ideas for potential movies during this time. In 2018, multiple news sites reported that Brian K. Vaughan had been hired to write a script for a new solo Silver Surfer movie, most likely being connected with the Fan Four Stick reboot. These plans were ultimately scrapped once the Fantastic Four and X-Men rights reverted back to Marvel following Disney's acquisition of Fox. This is when we finally reach this year, 2025, when Marvel has finally used their Fantastic Four rights with a completely new movie that's introducing the team into the MCU. And they're not only introducing the FF, they're also bringing in Galactus and the Silver Surfer. A Silver Surfer. This isn't a gender-swapped Norrin Rad, but rather an alternate version of his former lover, Shala Bal, in a reality where she was the one that made a deal with Galactus and got turned into his herald. While I'm not entirely against this idea and do appreciate interesting alternate takes on traditional characters, I still want to see Norrin Rad in live action again. I know that there was an alternate version of Shala Bal in the comics that also got turned into a Silver Surfer, but I still want to see the original Surfer in the movies. One theory that I like to think about is that we might see the Silver Surfer from the 2000s Fox universe return during Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars, with him finally being able to reunite with his new version of his long-lost lover. Or that Marvel might be planning on introducing Norrin as the Silver Surfer of the main MCU and have him team up with Shala Bal for a potential Silver Surfers movie, in plural. And Julia Garner did make some comments during an IGN interview saying that she's open to the idea of a spin-off. So who knows really, I'm just glad that First Steps ended up being a good movie, and I genuinely hope that eventually we get to see a Silver Surfer movie in the future. But hey, that's just what I think. What about you? Would you also like to see the Surfer get his own solo movie? What did you think about Fantastic Four First Steps? Did you like their new version of the Silver Surfer? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And, as always, thank you so much for watching.